Good morning, and thank you for joining us. I see some attendees populating our room right now. You will not be able to use your phone call or your audio, but please go ahead and start introducing yourself in the chat box if you have joined us via the computer. Just state your name and what program that you are joining us from. Hi, Linda. Hi, Annie. We will get started promptly at 10, so as you trickle in, go ahead and put who you are in the chat box. Hi, Viviana, HCC, one of your colleagues.
Hi, Viviana.
Susie, nice to see you. Pam, hey, Doug. Carolina, lots of names that I'm familiar with. Sue, another two Sues back to back. Dan, hi, Dan. All right, great. This is wonderful. We already have 19 people with us. Nikki, nice to see you again. Corksy, I've never met a Corksy. I like that name. Karen, nice to see you. All right, guys, so it is 10 o'clock, and I assume people will continue to introduce themselves as they join the chat. I have a very quick poll that I'm going to launch just to get an idea of who's in the room here. So you'll be able to see it. Just choose whatever roles. Some of you might fall into more than one role, so click as many that apply to you so we get an idea of who's joining us today. Oh, great. Lots of ESL instructors. Okay, so you guys will be able to see we have program administrators, instructional specialists, and many ESL instructors. So thank you so much for joining us today. This really gives us, a quick snapshot of who's joining us. My name is Gina Davis. If you haven't gotten a million emails from me at this point, I apologize, but thank you for joining us for our first Virtual Training Institute. We're so excited to have you. I have our wonderful colleague from HCC, Lindsay, who is going to be hosting our session for us today. She will introduce herself shortly and kick us off. So thank you for joining us. And thank you, Lindsay.
Well, thank you, Gina. As Gina mentioned, I'm Lindsay Comboy. I am an adjunct faculty member from the English Language Center at Howard Community College. And I'm currently teaching level 2 reading and writing. What you're going to see today, I began doing when I was teaching community English level 1. And I had a really large class, and I needed to find a way to be able to work with smaller groups in my classroom. So I stole when I used to work in K-12, I stole what some of those teachers did, and I began to use stations in the classroom. And feel free to ask questions as we go along. I'll do my best to answer them right away. If it's something that I'm going to cover in a bit, I'm just going to skip over it. But if you feel like your question isn't being answered, let me know and via the chat, and I will go on. So today, we are going to answer the following questions. What are stations? What are some of the examples from the classroom? Why should you use stations in your classroom? And then we're going to take a look and explore practical applications of stations in your classroom, and then brainstorm how you can incorporate stations into your lessons. Okay, so what exactly are stations? Stations are different activities set up to reinforce what the class is already learning. So you would take your lessons and break them down into different activities. The students then rotate in small groups around the stations, and they're set at intervals based on their language level and the tasks that you're doing. It's a really interactive and fun way to practice skills and provide formative assessments. And you'll see in the lesson plan that I'm going to describe today, I actually included a more formal assessment, a more summative assessment for listening at the very end of the activities that we did. Oh, let me go back, sorry. So the groups that that I had, there are a lot of different ways that you can group your students. Of course, you can do random grouping, so you can count them off. I had 5 stations, so you can count them off, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so forth. You can do heterogeneous grouping, which allows students of different levels to work together. This is a huge plus because students that are at the lower end of your class with a slightly lower proficiency, they can learn a lot from the higher level students. And conversely, the higher students learn even more because they're helping teach their peers and work on the different skills. You can group homogeneously, and this allows the stations to be differentiated for students according to their levels. And it allows for, if you have one of the stations as teacher time, it allows you to focus specifically on a skill and target those students. And timing, students can work together at their own pace to finish their activities, or you could have the stations set at specific time intervals and let them know it's okay if they did not finish their work. This is really important. Sometimes students get upset if they did not finish the activity. So if you, whatever your timing is, if you are one of the stations, and I'll go into that more, if whatever time you will need to complete your activity and do what you need to do, that should be the timing, whether it's 10, 15, 20 minutes per stations, and set your timer and rotate through. So the lesson plan that I'm going to go through today that I use, this was one of my first station lessons. I had 5 stations. The first one, as you can see, it was realia and vocabulary. I love using realia when I have the chance. Our topic was weather, and so I had a whole set of weather-related items, and we were also discussing severe weather. So I had different things that they might need should severe weather strike. You know, flashlight and batteries, a radio so that if the power went out, they had a battery operated radio. There was also a reading comprehension station. And while I don't always use my workbook, the workbook that we had a great example, and the students read about the people and then they had to answer the questions. And this gave a chance, they could work together as a group or independently. And then station 3 was their chance to work with me. All of my students in this specific class wanted help with writing, and I just felt that the book did not give enough of an opportunity to work on specific writing skills. And so we wrote a postcard, pretty authentic. We created postcards in our classroom, and we wrote those from actually a sunny place because it was in the winter, and it was a little cold outside, so we all pretended we were in Florida. And then station 4 was speaking, and the students used sentence stems and vocabulary to discuss the weather in the pictures with a partner. Some of them used their whole group to have a conversation about the weather. And then station 5 was very different. It was part of a group project or presentation, and they used a weather map, vocabulary, and sentence stems unique for each group to prepare a weather report, which was then presented later in the class. So how did the stations work in this lesson? As you can see, it wasn't just a basic, they go from 1 to 3 to 4 to 5, and then, or wherever they start. But I had the students rotate among the 4 main stations. And then when they were done those, they went to work on their presentations. So the patterns are endless for how you can set up your stations. My stations were homogeneously grouped, but the presentations were in heterogeneous groups. So after they finished their main stations, they then changed groups and worked on their project. Okay, so let's take a look at Station 1. Station 1, as I said, was realia and vocabulary. They had to match their vocabulary, which is written on the cards. Sometimes I do typed written, sometimes it's handwritten, and they had to match it to the different objects that you see on the table. So what they were given was a list, a numbered list, and the numbers were attached to the different realia, and they had to write the vocabulary word to go with it. So what a lot of the groups ended up doing is they worked together and they picked up the card and they put it with the different item, and they just had to reset it at the end so that the next group didn't have all the answers right there. And then they had to, if you'll notice at the far left of the vocabulary, there are different weather words. We have blizzard and tornado, snow. And what they had to do, they used sentence stems to be able, and I think one group had a gap fill. They had to use that and write a sentence in order to explain what weather they would use the different realia or different objects in. It's a great way for them to actually have a tangible item and not just a picture. Station 2 was about reading comprehension. And reading comprehension can be difficult, especially for those students who are lower in literacy skills. And picking out answers in order to picking out the specific information from a reading in order to answer the questions can be somewhat difficult for some of the lower levels, so like pre-beginning and level 1. So the questions, this actually came out of the book, and I had, there were 4 different readings to do. As you can see, this was from reading number 3. And they had to answer the questions and check the answers with their groups. Okay, so as you'll see, there's a picture of me writing on the board, and this was my small group time. In a class of 25 to 30 students, it's really hard to be able to find that time to work on specific skills and target it to the groups who may be struggling in one area or another. So what I did was I differentiated the work for each group. So my highest proficiency group, they didn't need much help, but we did work on how to write an address and how to start a letter and how to close a letter. The middle groups, they needed a little bit more help. And so in addition to the address, the opening, and the closing, I modeled what to write, and we wrote a postcard together. And then they took their own postcard and they wrote that on their own. As I mentioned, we pretended like we were in Florida, and we talked about how warm it is there and sunny, and I showed them a picture of a beach. And so we talked about different words that we could use, and different ways that we could share that experience with somebody else in writing. And I know that, you know, in this day and age, everybody has smartphones, and they'll text or their email, send pictures, post on social media. But as I explained with my students, you know, what do they get in the mail? What do all of us get in the mail? We get bills, we get junk mail. Nobody gets letters anymore. So it's very exciting when you receive a postcard or a letter, and it's very personable. So they really like that. And then my lowest group struggled a lot with literacy. I'm not sure if all of them would be considered SLIFE or students with limited or interrupted formal education, but most of them did struggle with literacy on some level, and writing was really difficult for them. So I not only modeled what to do with them and gave them vocabulary, but I provided them with a closed writing structure. So basically they had to fill in the gaps with that. Okay, so small talk is also something very challenging. This was more of an exercise so that they could start to use these 3 adverbs when talking about the weather. So, for example, it's very windy today. That's pretty basic. But as I just used the example of the adverb pretty, the students would often become really confused when using pretty, because of course pretty is often an adjective talking about how somebody looks or what something looks like. So using these 3 adverbs, they had to then also go on to describe the weather in the pictures. And the way I differentiated this, I did provide some sentence stems and vocabulary words for the lower groups, but then the higher group had to talk about what they would be doing in this weather situation, using our different weather words and using these adverbs. So it's very snowy. It's pretty sunny outside, you know, and talking about what the different activities that you could do in that weather. Okay, so the group project, I think they had the most fun with the group project. And this was kind of a culminating activity. They not only had to write out what they were going to say, and but they had to present it and talk about the weather using all of their vocabulary. And each group, as I said earlier, they went from being in their small homogeneous groups to larger, or not larger, to different groups which were heterogeneously grouped. And this gave a chance for the students who struggled speaking to be a little bit more confident, because their classmates could help them write out what they needed to say. So each group was assigned a region of the United States with a specific extreme weather scenario, and they had to explain what the weather was going to be using the present continuous, which was our grammar structure we were learning, and what things the viewers would need to have in order to be prepared, such as batteries and a flashlight, or do they need sunscreen? Do they need to save water? There were all sorts of different situations, and we had been watching different weather forecasts and practicing using these words. So after, or when they gave their presentation, what was the rest of the class doing? I provided the class with different sheets, which I'll show you in a moment, and they had active listening things that I then collected and used as a listening assessment. And so it was a great way to keep the students who were watching their classmates present stay focused on what they were doing, because as you know, with a large class, if somebody's presenting, the first presentation, everybody is light, and after a while they start talking with their friends, and they pull out their phones. I just received a great question from Susan, and I'm going to explain that in just a moment. It's about explaining the instructions. So I'm going to show you really quickly, and then I'll go on to go over the instructions. So this was the listening assessment that I gave. They had to focus on what the group was saying in order to explain or to be able to answer these questions. Excuse me. So the only struggle that we found, or I found with this, was if the students had a hard time understanding what the presenting group was saying. However, the students who were actually paying attention and doing this work, I was surprised by how well they did. And they not only had to know where in the US the group was presenting on, they had to know the weather and was it severe. And so you'll notice that I gave them options to circle. So I'm going to answer Susan's question now. What I did at each station, I had written directions at each station with detailed directions on how to complete the task. For the differentiated ones, I had, group one, these are your instructions, and it was all paper clipped together. Before we even began, I would walk through with the students and go through the instructions with each group. And that helped a lot. The first time that we did stations, they were a little confused. But because just like all other activities, they need to learn how to do the activity. So the more times we did stations, the more they were aware of how to do the station. And I also incorporated a lot of these activities into my regular classes. So sometimes if it was something new, students would come up to me while I was working in the small group, which was fine. But, sometimes it was difficult to be interrupted when working with a small group. But after the second time that we did stations, they were usually pretty good to go. So I want to share a few things about why we should use stations with adults. Because I did get this, that stations are used in kindergarten classrooms and throughout elementary school. Occasionally, I know teachers who've used them in middle school. And then with high school, sometimes, but not as much. So first I want to say stations are fun. When you have an activity that is fun, the students are more relaxed. And when they're more relaxed, research shows that they're going to learn and retain the language for longer. And it helps create an emotion that goes with that learning. The students are up and moving. I don't know about you, but I prefer to be up and moving and doing things. This was a great way to get them going around the room, doing different activities. I love to use realia with vocabulary. I think it's really important to give them something tangible. And according to Huckland and Block, a lack of vocabulary knowledge is the largest obstacle for second language readers to overcome. So giving that tangible object to go with the vocabulary, just a really, really great hands-on way to do that. Okay, so this will actually answer the question from Rachel. The students can be grouped heterogeneously or homogeneously. And I don't necessarily have a preference with this. It all depends on what we are doing and who my students are. So the group that I had in my community English class, having the homogeneous groups it facilitated that student small group time with me. And it gave me an opportunity to work on very specific skills targeted for that group. That being said, in my current class, in my reading and writing class, having the heterogeneous groups allows them to be more independent and to learn more from each other and teach each other different things and different skills, whether it is how to find information through skimming and scanning, and how to punctuate a sentence or a paragraph. So it all depends on your students, what you're trying to achieve. As I said, with the lesson that I'm describing today, I needed that small group writing time. I've also needed time with speaking, because trying to spend time speaking with students is, if you're in a large group, that can be really challenging. Okay, so again, small group time in a large class. Differentiated learning. This is great for the homogeneous groups. It gives them a chance to work on things and have materials that are specific for their learning needs. And they get to practice what they have learned. And last but not least, I think it bears repeating. Oh, whoops, not last but not least. Formative and summative assessment. You can use this for assessing whatever you're doing in class. Are they getting it? As I said, with the listening, the summative assessment came into play there. And then last but not least, it's fun. It's just so important to have a fun classroom. Okay, so I'm running short on time, so I'm going to be really quick about this. So I have some different activities that we used for stations, and I know everybody's probably looking at that middle one and saying, why did you play beer pong with your class? For my friends who are listening or from HCC, they'll know what this is. We have a teacher there that shared grammar pong with us. You can actually find the directions online, but I find that it's a great way to go over grammar exercises. It's really fun. But I've also done vocabulary practice and close reading exercises with it. And so basically it's like beer pong. I apologize, but I promise there is not beer in the class. The cups are actually taped down to the table. And if you look on the far right, they're board games. And at the end of the presentation, there's a link to to one of my favorite sites that has tons of games. Okay, so we don't really have much time to do a lot of brainstorming, which I had hoped to do. But if you have any questions, now is the perfect time to do that. So feel free to write any other questions. I hope to, if you have any of those, I can keep talking until if anything comes up. These are the resources. They are in the pamphlet that I had provided. I love Boggles World ESL. Everything is free on there, and it gives you just lots of downloadable material.
So we have one question from Nikki.
Okay.
Do you have any strategies to recommend if some students in one of the stations finishes early, and how do you encourage stations not to fall silent?
Okay, so that is a great question, Nikki. So what I actually discovered with the stations is I never gave them enough time to completely finish, which was perfect because they had to keep working. And I knew my students well enough how to group them so that they would be interactive and speak with each other. If it was something that they could do on their own, that was totally fine. But the ones that were speaking, they just interacted really well with each other, and they just talked all the time. And I've just get to know your students and what they need.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lindsay. We've really enjoyed this. If anyone has a moment, please, it's about, maybe a minute long, go ahead and take the survey that I put in the chat box so that we can really get some good feedback about how today went for everyone. And just, work towards offering more sessions like this in the future. But Lindsay, this has been wonderful. And we hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Okay. Thanks, Gina.
Yep.
Yes, there are some handouts.
Yep. So. And all the handouts and everything will be available on the Virtual Training Institute Wednesday website, not Wednesday, at the culmination of the Institute. I'm going to put everything up there, including the recordings. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Gina.